So let's understand how scope works in JavaScript. Scope means where can you see something, or in other words, what is the accessibility of something in a JavaScript program. Now usually those somethings refer to variables or maybe functions or objects. In other words, it's where can you use and see a variable within your JavaScript code? Where is it accessible? Now why would we want to care about that? Well, one advantage of using scope is it provides a level of security, because maybe you can't see that piece of code later on in your program, and so it's not accessible. It allows us to modularize our code a little bit better. There's two different types of scope we can work with: global scope and local scope. Global scope says it's visible throughout the entire JavaScript document. And that usually occurs when you declare a variable outside of a function. Local scope says you declare the variables inside the function. That means they live and they're accessible in the function, but once the function is over, they're not accessible anymore. Well, how does this work? Let's go ahead and create a brand new file. And I'm going to save that file. File save as, and I'll just call it scoper.html. And we'll go ahead and add the basics of our HTML to this document with our doc type and our HTML, and we can put a head and we can put a body. And within the head, we'll type in some code, but we want to make sure that we have our script tag. And I'll need to put that code inside of our script. And I'm going to go ahead and indent this aesthetic so you can see it better. And so now if I go ahead and I save this program, when we click on the button, it should go find the scope check function, which is right here, and display the variable s_name, which is global because it's declared outside of the loop. Let's see if that works. Click me, there's Mickey Mouse. So it is visible and it worked. Now why is that? Because since I declared the variable outside of the function, it has a global scope and it can be seen throughout all of this document. The whole document, I can see it and use it in my JavaScript. Well, what if I have declared that variable, or let's create a variable right here, s_new_name is equal to Donald Duck. And we'll go ahead and leave that alert, and let's do another alert, s_new_name. And let's save this and run it one more time. Now we created the variable inside of the function, and let's see how long that lives. So the first alert should display Mickey Mouse, and the second alert does display Donald Duck. So what happens if now we come here and create another function? We'll just call it new function, and let's do alert new function plus s_name and alert new function and s_new_name. So in other words, we're trying to access the global variable, see if it works, and then we're trying to access the local variable, which should be local only to this function. Let's go ahead and save that program and run it again. We should see Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and now we need to come back to our program, and I forgot to call that new function. So we'll say new function, we'll execute that, and that's how you can call a function. And let's actually do this too while we're here. Let's say scope check, so we know what function we're in when we're displaying this information. So when I run it, we should see Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and then we call a new function, and then we're going to see if we still see Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. There's our Mickey Mouse in scope check and our Donald Duck in scope check. There's our Mickey Mouse in new function, and something happened there. Control-Shift-I, uncaught reference, new name is not defined. So let's go take a look at the code. S new name was declared right there, but when we run that here, it says that's an error, and that's because since we declared the variable inside of the function, it only lives inside of that function. Once the function's over, it's not visible down here anymore. So that is a local scope of a variable, and that is a global scope of a variable. So let's see what else we could do. What if I have an if statement here? Let's add, we already know how the global works there, so let's comment that out. If S new name equal to Donald Duck, then I want to create another variable. I knew num equals 10, and let's alert in the if statement I knew num. And then let's come out here and do another alert, and we'll say out of the if statement I knew num. So in other words, we created a variable inside of the if statement, and now we know we're going to see S new name and S name throughout this whole function. But what happens if I make a new variable inside of a block? Can I see it here and then see it again outside of that block? Let's see what happens. So let's go ahead and run that. Sorry, we'll put it up here and we'll run it. Click me. Scope check Mickey Mouse, scope check Donald Duck. Here's the in the if statement, so it is visible. Out of the if statement, it's also visible. Now the interesting thing about that is that in other languages, this would only be visible until you hit the ending brace. But since you've declared it, you can go ahead and use it. What would happen if we did this? Alert before the if statement. And let's run it one more time. Let's see if we can access that variable before we even said we declared it. So let's go ahead and run that. Click me. There's the alert scope check, the alert scope check. Before the if statement, not defined. In the if statement and out of the if statement. So if I now try to access that variable, let me put this back, we had that 10, where we said we declared a variable, assigned it a value of 10, inside the if curly braces. Can I access the variable before I even declared it and assigned it a value? Let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Here's our scope Mickey Mouse, scope Donald Duck. Before the if statement, the variable is undefined. Then in the if statement, it's a 10. When the if statement's over, it's also a 10. So that obviously says that when you try to create a variable and assign it a value, you cannot access it before the variable has actually been worked with. Well, let's try something else. Let's go ahead and just declare the variable here. And somehow, let's say I knew num equals 10. So now we're trying to change the value of the variable, display the variable, and then we declare the variable in this if statement. Let's see what happens if we try to do that. Go ahead and run that. There's our scope Mickey Mouse, scope Donald Duck. Hold your breath. Before the if statement, 10. In the if statement, 10. Out of the if statement, 10. The way JavaScript works is if you declare a variable but you have not assigned it a value, it hoists that variable to the top of that function. In other words, it says it moves this declaration to the top of the function and makes it accessible. Now, for those coming from a structured language, this might feel really annoying because we like to declare our variables and use them after they've been declared. So it might just be good to get into the habit, so you don't get confused, of creating your variables all at the top, somewhere that you're used to it, and that way you don't have to worry about hoisting. Once again, that means you can declare the variable somewhere in the program, and as long as you haven't assigned it a value, you can actually use that variable, assign it, display it, and JavaScript doesn't care. But if I had assigned it a value right here, then remember, it was undefined. So that's another way that you can work with scope of a variable. Let's try one more variable and see what happens. Let's go ahead and we'll delete this. And we're going to go ahead and delete these alerts so we don't have to keep clicking on them. Here we said we have a variable called Donald Duck. We check the value. We declare the variable inewNum equals 10, we display it, and then we display it again. Instead of the word var, let's type in the word let. And let's see what happens. We'll go ahead and save that. And we run it. In the if statement, the value of 10. Ready? Something happened. Control-Shift-I. It says inewNum is not defined. And that's because if you create the variable using the word let instead of var, it now becomes what we call a block local, meaning it's only visible in the block where you created that variable. If I said this to be let, it would be visible in this block. This variable is only visible in this block. So if you try to access it outside of that block, we received an error. And this is a way you can do a global variable and a local variable, a block local variable. Different scope allows you to have different power. What would happen if we did this? Let's go ahead and say var sname. We have a var sname Mickey Mouse, a var sname Donald Duck. Let's do a var, or let's do a let sname, and let's make that to also be, let's do Goofy, and then we'll do inside the if statement, we'll do an alert of sname. Outside of the if statement, we'll do an alert of sname. And then we're going to go ahead and call that little function again. And we're going to do an alert of sname. So we'll do an alert of the if, alert of the function, and an alert of another function. Let's see what prints. Let's go ahead and run that. So the first alert prints an error. New name not defined. I think I have a typo. So let's go back and fix that. Right here, that needs to be sname. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go ahead and save that one more time. We'll run it. So the first one says Goofy. Now let's come back to the code. This one prints Goofy. Why didn't it print Donald Duck? Or why didn't it print Mickey Mouse? They're all the same variable names, but this one takes precedence because it was the last one declared. So what do you think this will display? Will it display Goofy, Donald Duck, or Mickey Mouse? Donald Duck. And that's because this variable is now out of scope because it only lived inside of that. And since this sname was declared after that sname, it now has precedence. So now let's call a new function where we print sname, and let's see who prints. Mickey Mouse. So as we declare variables, if variables have the same name, the last one declared takes precedence over the other ones that have been declared. And that's how you can work with scope.